At the Vatican's behest, Donald Trump journeyed to New York to participate in Pope Francis's funeral at St. Peter's Basilica. Stirred profoundly by a previous meeting with the pontiff, he made his way to Rome, where a serene moment of contemplation ignited a deep quest for redemption that transformed his spirit. The world awoke to the somber news as dawn broke: Pope Francis had passed. The announcement came not through sensational headlines but via the grave, resonant tone of the Vatican's press secretary, addressing the world from the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. In the early haze, the square stood hushed, the resonant, deliberate tolling of the basilica's bells reverberating through Rome's winding streets, each chime spreading like ripples across a tranquil lake. In New York, the city was just waking when a notification lit up Donald Trump's phone. He read the headline, paused, then reread it, sitting still as the distant murmur of morning traffic filtered up from below. The opulent fixtures of his penthouse shimmered faintly under a dull sky. It had been years since he'd truly reflected on this man. Memories stirred of a discreet Vatican encounter during his presidency, when global eyes watched him clasp hands with the serene, smiling pontiff, two men embodying starkly contrasting forms of influence. The Pope had spoken briefly then, yet his words lingered longer than Trump expected. Power, Pope Francis had said softly, is not for towering over others. It is for bending down to their level. The Pope had nodded, offered a warm smile, and said the expected pleasantries. But in the years that followed, amidst campaigns, defeats, noise, triumphs, and resentments, those words had faded under layers of urgency, until this moment. 3 hours later, a formal invitation arrived directly from the Vatican. A select assembly of world leaders, past and present, was summoned to the funeral mass, not for show or diplomacy, but because Pope Francis had wished it so before his passing, a final gesture of unity from beyond the grave. Trump held the thick, cream-hued envelope. Inside, penned in the elegant, cursive hand of Vatican scribes, was a modest summons: "You are invited to commemorate the life of His Holiness Pope Francis, shepherd of the faithful, advocate for the destitute, companion to the forsaken. Arrive in humility, leave in grace." He leaned back in his chair. No one compelled him to attend. Declining would draw no criticism, in fact, many would anticipate it. He wasn't a paragon of piety, despite his frequent mentions of faith on the campaign trail. Yet something stirred within him, an inexplicable pull, a recollection not of politics but of something deeper, more primal. He remembered his mother kneeling by her bed, her Bible's edges frayed from years of use, and how he, as a boy, listened, not fully grasping but feeling there was something greater than ambition beyond their humble queen's home. He folded the invitation with care, stood, and approached the window, looking out at the city he'd spent his life striving to dominate. Today, it seemed altered, diminished, as if it paused to ponder what endures when all else fades. He made his choice silently, without pomp or a public statement. He would attend. The journey to Rome was arranged with discretion, no media entourage, no fanfare, just a modest plane and a select few staff who knew to remain silent unless addressed. Trump spent the flight in quiet, gazing at the clouds below, which unfurled like the creases of an ancient cloth. He had logged countless miles for summits, rallies, and conferences, but this trip felt heavier, not a task or a performance, but something akin to a sacred quest, a pursuit of something he couldn't define but knew he'd misplaced. Rome welcomed him with a leaden sky and streets glossy from morning rain. Vatican security discreetly guided his motorcade through narrow lanes to the Apostolic Palace. The crowds along the route didn't cheer, they stood in solemn stillness, many holding rosaries or candles, their eyes swollen with sorrow. Trump didn't avert his gaze. He wasn't here to be noticed, he was here to witness. At the gates of St. Peter's Basilica, he stepped out unaccompanied. No cameras were permitted inside, no microphones to record every moment, just him, a man among mourners, a soul among souls. The basilica's interior was otherworldly. The air was dense with the scent of incense, the stone floor chilly beneath his shoes. Towering columns stretched into the dimness above, and candles glimmered on the marble, their small flames swaying to invisible currents. Clerics intoned softly in Latin, their voices threading through the arches like wisps of mist. At the nave's far end, on a plain wooden bier draped in white, lay Pope Francis's body, unembellished by adornments. Trump advanced slowly, his footsteps muted by the expansive space. Other leaders were present, presidents, prime ministers, monarchs, but he scarcely registered them. His focus was on the man who had once spoken to him of power not as dominance, but as responsibility. That voice was silent now, or perhaps it resonated more powerfully than ever. When the time came for individual blessings, the leaders approached the bier singly. Some bowed, some made the sign of the cross, others offered silent prayers. When Trump's moment arrived, he paused. No one prompted him or urged him forward. He moved of his own accord, each step deliberate, each breath steady. Kneeling at the simple rail before the bier, the world around him dissolved, noise, victories, conflicts, all meaningless here. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in decades, long before politics, skyscrapers, or headlines, he prayed. Not for triumph, favor, or protection, but for forgiveness, for the quiet, unnoticed decisions he'd made without considering their impact, for the grace to leave a legacy not merely grand and gleaming, but good, for the courage to kneel more often, not before crowds, but before a silent, humble truth no one can evade, the soul's accounting. As he stood, something shimmered in his eyes, not frailty or defeat, but something deeper, something he couldn't articulate but would hold long after the incense faded and the candles extinguished, something that began not with a proclamation or a signature, but with stillness. That morning, the sun couldn't break through the thick clouds over Rome. As the funeral procession commenced, a gentle fog blanketed St. Peter's Square, muting the colors of flags, the shine of ceremonial blades, and the polished shoes of diplomats treading over ancient stone. Donald Trump stood among the gathering of global dignitaries, his dark coat heavy on his frame, his hair slightly tousled by the damp air. The funeral mass was simple, no lavish displays or soaring orations, just the soft chant of ancient Latin rites, their rhythms enveloping the mourners like a timeless melody. He listened, not with his intellect, but with something more primal, something not entirely at ease. Roses adorned the rows of chairs across the square. Trump sat quietly, hands folded, as the scripture reading began, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." He shifted slightly. The words grated against old instincts. Meekness didn't erect skyscrapers, win elections, or face down adversaries across polished tables. Yet here, today, they didn't sound feeble, they sounded authentic. As the homily commenced, Trump's gaze drifted over the assembly, men and women in dark cloaks, heads lowered, to the simple white-draped coffin and the steady Paschal candle beside it, unyielding despite the chill breeze. To lead, the priest intoned, is to serve. Trump swallowed, an unexpected tightness in his throat. The square seemed to expand, centuries bearing down from all directions. Great figures had stood here, kings, popes, emperors. Many were forgotten, but a rare few were remembered, not for their conquests, but for their compassion. His thoughts turned to memories he seldom revisited, a boy in Queens listening through a half-open door as his mother prayed for her children, her voice quivering as she prioritized kindness over success. Yet he had pursued success regardless, all the way to the highest office, to towering structures and boardrooms where his name evoked awe and trepidation. Still, it hadn't silenced that faint, persistent longing. "Remember that you are dust," the priest said calmly, "and to dust you shall return." A breeze stirred. Trump closed his eyes. For a moment, he was merely a man, not a former president, not a billionaire, not a brand, but a soul briefly passing among shadows. The procession to the tombs commenced. Pope Francis's body was borne slowly to its resting place beneath the basilica. The leaders followed at a respectful distance, Trump among them, the slick stone crunching underfoot. No one spoke, the only sounds were the solemn tolling of bells and the murmur of countless footsteps in unison. As they passed through ancient corridors, past marble statues and fading frescoes, Trump couldn't help but ponder how many had believed themselves eternal here, and how many realized too late that they were dust. In the crypt, the final blessing was offered. When his turn came, he hesitated briefly before stepping to the tomb, placing a bare hand on the cold marble. In a whisper only the divine could hear, he murmured, "Help me hold on to what counts." There was no burst of light, no dramatic revelation, just the quiet pulse of a man beginning, at last, to pray. He turned away, blinking against a sting in his eyes. Outside, the sky had darkened, rain falling in thin, ceaseless streams. Rome mourned, and somewhere within Donald Trump, something long dormant began to stir. The Vatican gardens were closed to visitors, and Trump had no plans to see them. After the funeral rites, he was quietly led to a small guest residence nearby to rest before his long flight back. But rest eluded him. He stood at the window of his simple room, gazing at the intricate beauty beyond the stone wall, ancient olive trees, vivid clusters of bougainvillea, hidden fountains whispering to the earth. When the impulse struck, he donned a dark coat, requested privacy, and slipped out through a side door. The air was laden with the scent of damp stone and blooming jasmine. Pathways wound through arches and small bridges. Trump wandered without direction, hands buried in his pockets, the fog softening the world around him. Here, he went unrecognized, no cameras, no staff, just the tranquility of a place designed not for spectacle, but for reflection. Rounding a corner near an old, mossy bench, he spotted a lone figure, an elderly man in plain black robes, a silver chain gleaming at his chest. The man looked up, offered a small, knowing smile, and motioned for Trump to join him. Something about the gesture, its lack of insistence, its simplicity, prompted Trump to sit on the opposite side of the bench. For a moment, they sat in silence, a nearby fountain bubbling softly like an ancient chant without lyrics. Finally, the man spoke, his voice soft with a faint accent. "You prayed." Trump tensed slightly. "How do you know?" he asked, half-guarded. The man chuckled gently. "Those who listen for prayers hear their echoes." Trump didn't reply. The man continued, "Many come here thinking they need to be seen, to be significant." He turned and looked at Trump, his gaze piercing yet kind. "But the ones who matter most come seeking nothing but to recall who they are." Trump shifted on the bench. "And who am I?" he asked, almost defiantly. The old man smiled. "A man," he answered simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." Trump exhaled sharply, a faint laugh escaping him. "The world disagrees." "The world is noisy," the man said. "But truth is still." They sat quietly for a while. Eventually, Trump spoke, hesitantly at first, about ambition, the battles he'd fought and lost, and their toll. The man listened without interrupting, hands folded calmly in his lap. When Trump finished, the man nodded. "You've built much," he said. "But now you must build what cannot be seen." Trump frowned. "What's that?" "The architecture of the soul," the man replied softly. "Kindness, mercy, humility, these are towers greater than any steel or glass." Trump looked away, his throat tightening. The man stood slowly, his joints creaking, and rested a hand on Trump's shoulder briefly. "The Pope prayed for you," he said. Trump's head jerked up. "What?" "Not by name, but by spirit. He prayed for all who carry heavy burdens, that they might learn to bear them well." The old man smiled again, his eyes crinkling. "You're closer than you think." With that, he turned and walked slowly down the path, disappearing into the fog. Trump lingered for a long time, even after the bells fell silent, even after the fog turned to a steady drizzle. When he finally stood, something within him had shifted, not entirely, not irrevocably, but enough. Enough to choose the longer route back, enough to notice the small, delicate flowers blooming unseen in the cracks of ancient stone, enough to truly begin this time. The rain had eased to a murmur by evening, leaving the cobblestones slick and gleaming under the faint lanterns of the Vatican courtyards. Inside his modest residence, Trump sat at a narrow desk. The funeral invitation rested beside a worn leather Bible, placed there by an attendant. The room carried the faint aroma of incense and rain-dampened stone. He hadn't opened a Bible in years, not since childhood, when he'd run his fingers along its pages as his mother's gentle voice filled their simple home. Back then, faith was woven into daily life, unquestioned and pure. The pages rustled softly as he let the book open naturally, unsure what he sought. His gaze fell on a verse he hadn't considered in decades: "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." The words seemed to glow on the fragile paper, delicate yet enduring, like a lighthouse on a dark coast. Trump stared at them, feeling something awaken within him, something he couldn't name. Without overthinking, he wrote the verse into a small notepad by the phone, his handwriting shaky, unfamiliar. The act of writing felt odd but essential, as if grounding him to something true. The next morning, before Rome fully stirred, he returned to St. Peter's Basilica. The square was nearly empty, cloaked in quiet reverence. A few pilgrims knelt or stood in silent prayer, no cameras, no reporters, just the ancient stone and the sacred stillness. The guards at the entrance recognized him but said nothing, merely allowing him to pass. Inside, the basilica was vast, empty, and alive with sacred silence. Columns rose like a forest of marble, pools of candlelight shimmering on the polished floor. Trump moved slowly toward the altar where Pope Francis had often led Mass, his steps echoing in the immense space. He paused briefly before kneeling, the motion stiff and unfamiliar at first. He bowed his head, resting a hand lightly on the cool stone. For a long moment, he simply breathed, feeling the weight of it all settle on him. Then he spoke quietly. "God," he began, the word catching in his throat. "If you're there, and I believe you are, I'm not here to negotiate." He paused, wrestling with the depth of what he wanted to express. "I'm not here for victories or anything to exalt my name. I'm here because I lost my way. I forgot what matters. I forgot what it means to be small." The words came haltingly, but once they began, they flowed. "I forgot what it means to be thankful. I forgot what it means to trust beyond myself. I forgot what it means to kneel." His voice cracked on the last word, and he let it. He thought of his mother's prayers, whispered late at night when she thought no one heard, of the purity of that life, its grace, how she loved without needing the world to know her name. "Help me," he whispered, "help me recall. Help me be the man she prayed for, the man this world needs, not the loudest, not the mightiest, but the right one." The basilica's silence embraced him, holding him like a long-lost melody. A few warm tears slid down his cheeks, unbidden and genuine. No one interrupted, no one recorded the moment, no one demanded a speech or a signature. He remained until his knees ached and his body shivered slightly from the cold seeping through the marble. When he rose, he felt altered, not remade, not reborn, but shifted, like a great ship slowly turning toward a far-off shore he'd lost sight of. As he approached the grand doors, he noticed an elderly nun lighting candles in a side chapel. She met his gaze and smiled, a small, knowing smile, not one offered to wealth or power, but shared between pilgrims. He nodded back, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Stepping outside, the sun was just piercing the clouds, casting golden beams onto the wet stone. Trump pulled his coat tighter and stepped forward, feeling the faint warmth of light on his face. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't glory, it was something quieter, steadier, an invitation to walk a new path. This time, he was ready to accept it. The return flight to New York was peaceful. Trump sat by the window, watching the Atlantic as the sun dipped in a slow blaze of orange and purple, casting long shadows over the rolling clouds below. He barely touched the meal the attendants offered, hardly acknowledged the aides who checked on him. He wasn't angry, wasn't plotting, he was reflecting, the way people do when something stirs deep within, too profound to ignore, too new to define. When the plane touched down at JFK, the city sparkled in the winter night, countless artificial lights glittering against the darkness. New York had always seemed immense to him, but now it appeared smaller, quieter. He moved swiftly through the airport, declining the press, refusing to give a statement. His team had prepared remarks, something respectful, polished, appropriately mournful. He set them aside without comment. Instead, he went home. The gold and marble of Trump Tower gleamed as ever, but even its familiar luster seemed less imposing. Riding the private elevator to his penthouse, he caught his reflection in the mirrored walls, the same tailored suit, the same resolute gaze, but something had softened at the edges, like the first melt of winter frost. The first few days back were marked by an unusual calm. Meetings were deferred, interviews postponed. For once, the machinery of publicity and politics paused, not by design, but because he chose it so. He rose early, sitting by the tall windows with a cup of black coffee, watching the city stretch into the horizon. Sometimes, he opened the small leather Bible he'd brought from Rome, the verse he'd copied tucked neatly between its pages, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." At first, it felt futile, then less so. One day, he summoned his son Baron to his study. The boy had grown tall, exuding the quiet confidence of youth not yet weighed down by the world's demands. Trump looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Your grandmother," he said finally, "prayed for me every night. I didn't always understand why." Baron, sensing the weight of the moment, stayed silent. "I think," Trump continued, "she prayed because she knew something I didn't, that no matter how strong you think you are, you can't bear everything alone." He handed Baron the Bible. "It's not about weakness," he said. "It's about knowing when to kneel." Baron turned the book over in his hands, his expression unreadable, but when he nodded, Trump felt a release in his chest, something he hadn't realized he'd been holding. In the days that followed, subtle shifts emerged, an unexpected call to a former rival, not to rekindle conflict, but to quietly wish them well during a family illness, an unpublicized visit to a small church soup kitchen in Queens, where he spent the day packing canned goods and shaking hands with people indifferent to towers or headlines, a handwritten note, sent anonymously, to a former employee struggling with medical bills, accompanied by a check to clear the debt. None of this reached the news, nor was it meant to, but it mattered. Gradually, those closest to him noticed. His staff grew calmer, less hurried, his family drew nearer at dinner, his own heart, still fiery, carried a new undercurrent of humility, a thread of grace woven into the familiar tapestry of ambition. Sometimes at night, he stepped onto the balcony, gazing at the city that had once seemed the center of everything. It was still vast, still radiant, but now he understood the greatest battles weren't fought on stages, in boardrooms, or behind podiums. They were fought in silence, in prayer, in the quiet choice to kneel when no one watched, in the resolve to love what couldn't love back, in the determination to build something unseen, brick by invisible brick. He wasn't flawless, not transformed instantly. Old habits persisted, sharp words, flashes of pride, but a seed had been sown. Each day, he nurtured it with small acts of kindness, silent prayers, and a humility learned not through defeat, but through surrender. Months later, when asked in an interview about his trip to Rome, Trump simply smiled and said, "It reminded me that sometimes the best thing you can build isn't made of steel. It's made of grace." The interviewer, sensing a change but unable to pinpoint it, moved on. This concludes our narrative journey. I trust you found this gripping saga of intrigue, cutting-edge innovation, and astonishing discoveries captivating. From where are you tuning in today? I'm curious to learn which corner of the globe this tale has touched. If this escapade held your interest, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for a steady stream of compelling, mind-expanding stories just like this one. Fresh material is posted frequently, ensuring you're always in the loop for the newest spellbinding adventures. Be sure to pass this video along to your loved ones and friends. It's a great way to share positivity and insight while expanding our circle of story enthusiasts. Your encouragement is invaluable. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to welcoming you back for the next tale.